Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, in which we bring you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Well, today we'll take a look at the official report into Indian interference in Canada, as well as discussing a statement by US Secretary just released slamming the very same India. We'll take a look at how the Indian Parliament is now shaping up to try to limit Modi's power, and then we'll have a look at how Sikhs in the UK are being geared up for this year's general election. And joining me for Perspectives, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and hello to all of our amazing viewers out there.
And of course, together we will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. As usual, we'll take a look at the large batch of your wonderful comments, and we'll be answering some of your questions raised in those comments with our own thoughts and perspectives. So sit back, relax, and to kick us off, as always, James, what have you got for us today?
Well, it is a hot button subject in Canada with the interference report that's been brought out by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. And I'm going to bring that up on the screen because I think that it really is an eye-opener, not only in terms of the report contents, but there's a lot of redacted sections of it, which people are demanding the release of some of the names. Is that on your screen there, Angus? Okay, so apologies for that. So with the report, it's a special report on foreign interference in Canada's democratic processes and institutions. And as I was touching on, some of the redacted sections actually link to certain Canadian politicians and government staff who may be involved in cooperating with foreign governments within the interference realm. Here in the report, it starts off and it gives you an idea as to what they consider interference and what they consider a gray zone, which is deception, and then, of course, what they consider is not interference. So it's a great little reference point for people to understand when we talk about foreign interference, as Angus and I do quite often. I know that some people out there may have questions about what qualifies as interference and what does not. So this report really gives you a good idea as to what qualifies, what doesn't, and what's kind of in a gray area. And one of the gray areas that I wanted to cover is here, and it's paying Canadian media outlets to produce foreign propaganda without attribution. Now, this is something that has been going on for a long time, where foreign governments or foreign entities will pay to certain media outlets to weigh the stories in their favor or to actually print their propaganda and report it as news. So that's something that was really big that I felt really needed to be highlighted in this. But also, if you are looking at the information on the screen, again, you'll be able to decipher what is, what isn't, and what is gray area. Further going down here, we're going to take a look at one of the other very important factors in this report was that the threat of foreign interference in our processes and institutions when it comes to democracy. And what was very interesting is that it used to be China at number one as a threat to Canadian interference, and then number two used to be Russia. In this new report, India has taken the number two position, which I thought was very important to put out there, given all of the highlights on the interference that Canada is investigating and getting information of when it comes to the Modi government and other parties within India to influence Canadian politics. Now, this has gone as far as influencing members of parliament and influencing the last election through supporting financially and other ways of making people feel like they needed to vote for a certain individual in that race and to win that riding. Now, this is very important, and it's something that, as I said, the Canadian government needs to open up and be transparent as to which members of parliament they are accusing or that they have information of that were involved in this foreign interference scheme. So again, it's a very big thing. As I stated, here you can see that it used to be Russia and China as the biggest threats, but right there it really brings up that now you have India as a major player and number 2 in a threat to Canada's democracy. Another point that I wanted to bring up at the end of this here was that the report also covers transnational repression. And that, again, is very important, something that Angus and I talk about quite frequently on the show. But this gives you a good understanding of what qualifies as transnational repression and what that entails. So, again, I just thought it was an important factor for our viewers because some of you may not understand the depth or the full definitions thereof. So that'll help you to understand when Angus and I are talking about certain issues. Now, once again, we encourage you to share your ideas and your thoughts with us, and we would love to hear from other Canadians, especially on your opinions and your feelings on this report. The full report is available on the Canada government website, so you can just search for it, and you will find it under the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. All right, with that, I'm going to send it right back to you in the studio in London, Angus.
Yeah, thank you, James. What an interesting report. It brings up so many big discussion points. And the original chart, actually, at the beginning of that report, is fascinating. Of the sort of the various definitions of what accounts as interference. And yeah, there's a few words I picked out there, but particularly what is not seen as interference is dissent, and that in itself says an awful lot. Because here in a democracy, you are allowed to dissent. You are allowed to publicise differing opinions, even if they are offensive. As we've said before, as long as they don't break any laws, then you are allowed to dissent. That's something that India has always had a huge problem with, particularly about the diaspora expressing their opinions in the West. I also thought what was very interesting is proxy. They don't use the word proxy, but effectively it is proxy campaigning. It is they are using usually financial means to entice Canadian politicians and maybe even academics and people of high profiles to act effectively as proxies for India, to influence Canadian politics, and that's what it's all about. And that falls into what they call the grey zone. Yeah, it is. It's very hard to, where is that line? It's very hard to define exactly where that line is, and hence why it falls into the grey zone. But I think what's really interesting about this report, James, is it highlights the multilateral attack on Western democracies by India. This almost become taken for granted from the likes of Russia and China, but now India are joining those two prime examples of non-democracies in interfering in Western politics and Western society. And this multilateral approach, it forms at the sharp end. It's transnational repression, it's murder in any other word. But it's also a lot more subtle. It's social, it's political, it's economic. They're using their own resources to essentially pay for proxies, as I've mentioned before, these advocates for India to start influencing social opinion through pressure groups, lobby groups, and through the politicians themselves. So yes, James, a very, very interesting report. Thanks for that. That actually segues very nicely into my first story, and if I can share this video now. So this was really interesting, just released overnight in the US. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has stood up and made a very, very powerful statement concerning Indian interference, but also primarily the state of India and how it's treating its own citizens, particularly its minorities. And he made the following statement in amongst many others. He said, "In India, we see a concerning increase in anti-conversion laws, hate speech, demolitions of homes and places of worship for members of minority faith communities," he said. The US Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Rashad Hussain, faulted efforts by Indian police in India. He said Christian communities reported that local police aided mobs that disrupted worship services over accusations of conversion activities, or stood by while mobs attacked them and then arrested the victims on conversion charges. So this is again, and it forms part of a wider statement. And the US has danced a very difficult line here. In one side, they're trying not to upset India too much because what's at stake is the geopolitical relationship that they are trying not to unbalance, of course, in the context of China. But at the same time, the US allegedly stands for freedom, it stands for human rights, etc., etc. So once again, they are having to be firm in one hand, but put a velvet glove around that iron fist. So it is usually couched in very diplomatic language, but here Antony Blinken has actually stood up with his US ambassador at large and made some very strong statements against China. I beg your pardon, against India, but also in the same context as China and Russia. So yeah, James, it does appear that Western governments, well, I'll leave out the British government because they are notable by their silence, but certainly in the Americas, Canada and US, both governments standing quite firm and being quite robust now about India.
Well, and I think that with elections coming up in the UK as well, I'm hopeful that whatever the next office is, whoever's in leadership at that point will also join us in taking a stand.
Yeah, let's hope so. Okay, moving on to my second story. Now, Rahul Gandhi, we've talked quite a lot about the Indian elections and the opposition. We finally, after 10 years, we have an official opposition in the Lok Sabha in India. And Rahul Gandhi, the leader of the opposition, has made his first speech, and it's quite robust, and it is quite a powerful speech, and it implies an awful lot. Now, this speech he gave yesterday, I'll just take some of the sound bites from that speech. Powerful words. He says, the government has political power, but the opposition also represents the voice of India's people, he said. This time, the opposition represents significantly more voice of the Indian people. Of course, it does now, yes. Now, in terms of structure, the BJP only won 240 seats in this year's poll. That's out of 543, and that was its worst showing in a decade. And it needed 32 more than that to claim the majority. So it had to rely on this coalition to build its 293-seat majority. So Gandhi then went on to say, we would like the House to function often and well. It's very important that cooperation happens on the basis of trust. And that word trust, which is continually broken in India, it's very important that the voice of the opposition is allowed to be represented in this House. And the question is not how efficiently the House is run. The question is how much of India's voice is being allowed to be heard in this House. That's a big statement because, of course, with the BJP's dominance over the last 10 or more years, it's been the worst form of democracy, and again, democracy in the loosest sense of the word, where the BJP and Modi have been able to steamroller through legislation almost unopposed because there was no effective opposition. So what the BJP wanted, and by proxy the RSS wanted, it happened. So we have seen some of the most powerful, some of the most dangerous legislation pushed through over the last 10 years that has really marginalised minorities. And he continued to say the idea that you can run the House efficiently by silencing the voice of the opposition is a non-democratic idea. This election has shown that the people of India expect the opposition to defend the constitution of this country. Yeah, they are big, powerful words. They're very political words. Now, Congress, they have had a long history, not all of it good. Of course, the Congress Party were involved in 1984 and the horrors of 1984. And the Gandhi dynasty, it's a big dynasty. It carries a lot of weight in terms of its history and the heritage it stands for. But again, not all of that is good, and particularly with the Sikh community, most of it is really far from good. So the question is, though, will Gandhi's position as leader of the opposition, will it have this effect that we hope it will have in India, where at last there is a strong opposition? A good democracy needs a strong opposition to be able to stand up to the ruling party and temper, to soften any bad legislation that is targeted at the minorities. We shall see, James, but certainly in our democracies, we always function well with a stronger opposition, do we not?
Absolutely, and let's hope that there is more respect paid to the people of India when it comes to the constitution that they should be adhering to.
Yeah. Okay, now moving on to my final story of the day. Yesterday we covered how the American Sikh organisations, particularly the Sikh Coalition, were working with other organisations to assist American Sikhs for the forthcoming presidential elections coming up later this year, and providing all sorts of services to assist people to make sure that their voice is heard. Now, here in the UK, we have general elections coming up in only 8 days or something, the 4th of July, whatever that is. And again, the Sikh community has got together to organise initiatives to help British Sikhs, or Sikhs as we call them here in the UK, British Sikhs to assist them in registering, making sure that their voice is heard. And they've launched this new campaign empowering the Sikh community ahead of the 2024 general election. And they have said it is a call to action for British Sikhs to unite and fight for our rights in the upcoming elections. And of course, we did have the Sikh manifesto released last week, which we've talked at length about. And yesterday, they have launched the Sikh Vote campaign to call to action for Sikhs in Britain to unite and fight for our rights in the upcoming election. It's our moment to ensure that our voices are not just heard, but acted upon, that our community struggles are acknowledged, and that those representing us in Parliament are held accountable. For too long, the Sikh vote has been taken for granted, and the community has faced relentless injustice under this government. We've been unfairly targeted, our voices silenced, and our rights ignored. The prolonged suffering of Jagtar Singh Johal, who's been in prison for over 7 years without charge, is a stark reminder of this government's failure to protect its own. Sikh activists have been unfairly targeted under the government's Prevent strategy, with Schedule 7 legislation misused. And they talk about the misuse of Schedule 7, Indian pressure on UK policies, commemoration of historical events. Now, I'm rushing over that because there's a lot there to unpack. But basically, yeah, this is in Britain. I've mentioned this earlier today. The Americas are very notable by their powerful advocacy for their Sikh communities. But the British government, for some reason, and we've talked a lot about this, the British establishment, for some reason, is not as protective, is not as vocal over British Sikh rights. And a prime example raised in this document is the imprisonment of Jagtar Singh Johal. He's been in prison for 7 years in India, British citizen, and the British government have done pretty much nothing about it. That's just one indication. But of course, there is this long history. The British establishment has cozied up to the Indian establishment over a long period of time, the Brahmins in India. And the evidence is everywhere, which is possibly why the British government is never vocal and is never supportive of the Sikh community. And another element here raised is commemoration of historical events. It's very hard for the British government to be persuaded to commemorate 1984 of all things. That's what a huge rally in Trafalgar Square in London was about last weekend. To try and highlight this fact that the British government keep trying to brush under the carpet. What were the British government's involvement in 1984? We know they were involved, etc., etc. And the list goes on, and I don't want to dwell too long about that. Schedule 7 is worth a quick mention, just for those wondering what on earth Schedule 7 is. This is, again, we talk about India's National Security Act, which is a dreadful piece of legislation, the most anti-democratic piece of legislation. Well, here in the UK, we have very powerful anti-terrorism laws, and usually, I say usually, they are used for good intent with good motivation and in the correct way. Sometimes they have been misused, and this Schedule 7 has arguably been misused against members of the Sikh community. We have young members of the Sikh Youth, I think it is one of the organisations, that India has branded as a terrorist organisation. I don't think the British government has, but young members of this organisation have been detained, flying back into the UK, and served a Schedule 7, which means they can be detained for, I think it's up to 12 hours. Anyway, we can correct that in due course. But they can be detained, questioned, their mobile phones and devices confiscated, and they have to give their passwords so that the state can look through it. It's very interfering. It's very controlling. It's very 1984 for those that understand the George Orwell reference. And this misuse of Schedule 7 has been highlighted by many organisations, and we do like to highlight this as well. So yeah, we are not without fault here in the UK, and it is our job, James, to keep highlighting these issues where there are double standards.
And that's definitely one of our goals here with the show, Angus.
Absolutely it is. So, okay, let's move on to our next segment, and that is where we start covering your wonderful comments. And the first one I wanted to cover, and apologies to Harbinder Sandhu we did mean to cover this one. We brushed over it yesterday when we were rushing through the show, because we're always rushing against the clock. But I did want to bring it back for today's show. Excuse me. You made the comment about the Amritpal update. Very good indeed. No one could divide Hindus and Sikhs in at least Punjab. No riots or communal violence happened in Punjab during the 1980s. Yes, there was sporadic and individual violence, but people always trusted each other. This is a very powerful point, and I was upset I didn't raise this yesterday. That's why I brought it back today. Yeah, we get a lot of comments, and have done for the last year or more, of people in the Punjab saying, hang on, we have Hindu friends, and likewise from Hindu people saying, hang on, we've got loads of Sikh friends. We all get on well with each other. What's all with all this division? Yeah, absolutely. And it's so inherent as part of the Sikh community. They are the most hospitable, the most amicable and the most welcoming community certainly I've ever come across. And they are non-judgmental. They treat everyone as equals. And likewise, any of their Hindu friends, Christian friends, whatever religion is, and Muslim friends, it doesn't matter. They're always welcomed, and why the Sikh Empire was such a success back in the 19th century. So yeah, absolutely. It is during the 1980s, that dreadful time when the real enemy was the Indian state, who were attacking the Sikh community. Of course, it wasn't the Hindus at the time, well, obviously with just a few exceptions, the Hindu proxies again for the government. But certainly the majority of Hindus were not like that. They were just ordinary people like you and me who just want to live a peaceful life like the Sikhs did. So yeah, it's a very powerful point, that this division that's been created by the Hindutva side, the Hindutva extremists, they're the ones trying to divide the communities. It's not the Hindus, it's not the Sikhs, it's not the Christians, it's not the Muslims. It's those driving this dreadful agenda of division. Anyway, so thank you for that comment. Okay, our next comment, and wow, the yoga saga just grows legs and just gets bigger and bigger. The backlash is really taking off on social media, and lots of comments about that. Kamal Chawla commented, this lady, this influencer who used the Daba Sahib to practice her yoga. And again, in the very first show when I talked about this, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. How wrong I was. Clearly, she knew very well what she was doing. And this comment here, why didn't she use the Ram Mandir? This is the new temple in Ayodhya. This is the new Hindu temple. Again, we've covered this in news items. A very provocative, very controversial new temple in Ayodhya. That Narendra Modi, the RSS, have been campaigning for years. The Supreme Court just rubber stamped it through. Built on the destroyed Muslim temple, a mosque, I beg your pardon, that had been there for centuries, and there's a history before that which I won't dig into. But essentially, very controversial, upset an awful lot of people. But yeah, if she wanted to make a point, why didn't she go up to the Ram Mandir to do it instead of here? She knew exactly what she was doing. Then he followed that with this very interesting comment, and this prompted me again to look about this Kangana. Now, let me talk about this Kangana runner. This comment says, you are a friend of Kangana. Kangana passed a provocative comment against the Sikhs. Yeah, for those who might not be aware of this, Kangana Ranaut is a 38-year-old Bollywood actress. She's a very glamorous lady, very clearly very influential person. And last September, she made the following statement. Khalistani terrorism makes them look bad, and it will ruin the credibility of the entire community and their overall perception. In the past, also, Khalistanis have severely damaged the whole Sikh community. I request the entire Sikh community, in the name of religion, they must not get excited or instigated by Khalistani terrorists. Jai Hind. What an arrogant, insensitive statement. I read this and I was horrified that a young lady, clearly, who wasn't even born in 1984, can make a statement so patronising to the Sikh community to say, don't worry about all that. You're the problem. The tens of thousands that were killed in the genocide, no, that's your problem. It's you Khalistanis caused all this. And then to finish a statement with Jai Hind, which in itself was provocative. But what she's advocating, she's telling the Sikh community to come out in support of Akhand Bharat. And again, I had to check out, what is Akhand Bharat? Akhand Bharat is the old British Empire India. It includes Bangladesh, the Muslim areas of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan. It's this huge area incorporating the whole of current India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. But it follows the old British Empire line. So what she's saying is we should all support the old British Empire boundaries, territory, Because essentially, we want it to become one big Hindu Rashtra. Now, it's all right if you're a Hindu saying that, but what about all the Muslims? I'm sure they've got to say something about that. What about all the Sikhs and the Christians and the Jains? It's shocking. So this comment here, James, it is the most, this lady, the yoga girl, who's clearly friendly with Kangana. There is a very powerful but very subtle influential campaign going on across social media to get this awful Hindu Rashtra agenda across at every level.
Absolutely, and just goes to show that a lack of education on facts goes a long way to breed more ignorance, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, it is. It's and I do rant about this because it astonishes me, the arrogance of many of these Hindu people with high profiles who should know better. They have a huge responsibility, and it's so divisive, things like this. Okay, and we had, now there were 3 comments, and I wanted to raise these 3 comments. And I'll just quickly paraphrase them. The British took the Punjab, the country of Sikhs, and left with these criminals on both sides to the small community who fought side by side with Britain for all different places. The British have been very unfair with Sikhs when they left India. Sikh community is being penalised and criminalised for trusting India on 1947 and didn't demand their homeland. All these 3 comments just refer to one basic thing. And it's almost an embarrassment as a British person for what happened in 1947, actually, and before, and what went after. And we get a lot of comments like this, and they are totally justified, that the British establishment during partition, and they're not entirely to blame, it is not black and white, and and I'm not defending the British, well, I am to some degree. They were in a situation that was very complex, and they took what they saw as the best way out. But unfortunately, that best way out for Britain was not necessarily, well, it definitely wasn't the best way out for the Sikh community. And hundreds of thousands, if not more, died in partition. It was a massacre. It was the most bloody, horrible massacre. It was, again, another genocide. And we essentially were responsible for that, we the British. And I don't take responsibility for that. I'm a generation that was not involved in that. But as I keep saying this, and I've said it many times, that we British now of our generation have a responsibility to highlight what happened and do something about it, try and rectify this place. So these comments from our viewers are absolutely justified. And it is our responsibility to do something about it, to campaign. And Khalistan, to me, is the most justified answer, the most justified compensation for what the British did. We took away the Sikh Empire in the 19th century. We have the right, no, not the right, we have the responsibility to give it back to them, to campaign for the Sikh community, to give them back their homeland. Because to me, that is the compensation that we owe to the Sikh community. And we certainly do our bit from here, James. But yeah, I'm handing back to you, James, but it's really probably more on my shoulders than the Canadians. I'm sure even the Canadians have a lot to complain about the British.
Well, it's true we do, but I think that we also have a role to play on the international stage as a former part of the Commonwealth and part of the British Empire, to play a role and have our voices heard to help with the Sikh initiatives and the Khalistan movement. Yeah,
and I referred there to the one of these comments is where the Sikhs have, after that history, they joined the British Army. They were invited to join the British Army because they were such brave warriors. They fought heroically, like the Gurkhas. That's another similar story. And the Sikhs have served with absolute distinction. They are some of the most highly decorated soldiers in the British Army. Their service to the British government and the British state has been exemplary, and it's something that the community should be very proud about. But of course, they are very well known, the Sikh community, for their charitable works as well. So their service to humanity in general is enormous. It is never widely enough publicised. So James, I believe you have something that you'd like to share with us today, just to highlight this very fact.
I do, and the video content that you're going to see is in relation to an opportunity I had to meet up with a lot of the assisting the Ukrainian refugees as they crossed the border into Poland just after the war started. When Russia went in and the Ukrainians were forced to flee their country with nothing but the clothes on their back and what they could carry, At the borders of Poland, as the Ukrainians crossed, there were welcome centers. And the welcome centers were set up to not only feed and clothe individuals, but they also had rest stations and warming stations. Now, it was below zero in terms of temperature in the areas that they were fleeing. So they were very cold, and they brought children and their pets and just whatever they could bring. There to welcome them were the United Sikhs as well as other NGOs from around the world. And here you can see we're unloading a truck full of rice and other goods that they were cooking 24 hours a day, non-stop, in order to make sure that these people were fed, that they were cared for, and that they knew they weren't alone. And all too often within North America or around the world, the Sikhs don't get enough attention on the great things they do for humanity. And that, I think, is really important. The next part of this video is a gentleman from Seattle, Washington. Mr. Singh is there volunteering and giving his time and all these other amazing volunteers to help the people. So I'd like to share with you what he had shared with me on that evening.
My name is Balwant Singh and I'm from Seattle, USA.
Awesome. And what are you doing here today?
Hey, recognize the human race as a one. So United Sikhs, the NGO, UNO affiliated, on the ground in the Poland by the Ukraine border. So we are here to serve my brother, my sister, as the crisis began. So since the second day, we came up here, we start the breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the hygiene for the babies, the female needs, whatever they needed. We saw the ladies, the the moms, the kids, when they're walking through, we saw their face. It's terrible, terrible. And we also serving at the night, you know, the temperature goes below the freezing. So we set up the big tent. So around 8,000 to around 20,000 people go in, kind of sheltering, sitting, talk to their families. It's the warm, we put up two big blows, the heaters, that will give you warm. So then they go ahead to the buses, then they went to in the shelter. So this is kind of the crisis camp. Once they come up, we welcome them. We said, no worries. So we are with you. So that's what the United States is doing on the ground.
And there you have it, Angus. Just amazing work being done around the globe. Wherever there's strife, wherever there's struggle, wherever there's disasters, you'll find the Sikh community just giving everything they can.
Yeah, such a fundamental part of Sikhi, and it's very, very admirable. Thank you, James, for that. But that was it. That was Perspectives. Please don't forget to keep those comments coming in. And yes, we are loving your questions and pointing out some interesting angles, as always, to our stories. So please do keep them coming in. And don't forget, if you'd like to record a short video message on anything relevant, do it and send it in. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Don't forget, you can, of course, message us directly at message@satellitetv.com on any news items you'd like us to highlight. But in the meantime, thanks for watching Perspectives. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James.
Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.